Your Bibles, if you would, to Jeremiah chapter 37. Just got a couple of last-minute things we didn't quite get to Wednesday evening in chapter 37, and then we'll jump into chapter 38 in our study. Together this morning. So in chapter 36, who did we encounter? Who did Jeremiah? Well, he didn't technically encounter specifically. Which king are we dealing with in chapter 36? Jehoiakim, right? That's the chapter he deals with the penknife. Remember, he takes that message and Jeremiah calls for Baruch, the scribe, to come. He writes all the message down. Says, you go show it to Jehoiakim, or actually, you go show it to the people. Go tell the people about it. Some of the princes heard about it, and it eventually ends up in the king's hands, and he does what with it? Cuts it in pieces and burns it up in the fire. God tells Jeremiah to go do what? Go write it down again. And then give him a little more when you're done. And so that's what happened in chapter 36 in relationship to Jehoiakim, who was king when Jeremiah is writing about that particular moment in history. But in chapter 37, which king have we jumped to? Now we're up to Zedekiah. So keep in mind, again, you cannot read the book of Jeremiah chapter 1 to the end in chronological order. It is not in chronological order. It's in story order. He tells a story about some piece of history, then he'll turn around the next chapter and move to a different piece of the history, and he may turn around the next chapter and go back to a different piece of the history. He's just telling the story. He's just telling the accounting of events and things that are occurring. So you won't be able to keep a sense reading the book of Jeremiah front to back as to the chronological order of that history. You kind of have to piece it together and move the pieces of the puzzle into their right places to kind of see a timeline, if you will, of all of those things. But in this particular period of time that's being recorded here in chapter 37, what's going on with the Babylonians? Okay, they've been besieging Jerusalem, but Egypt comes along and starts causing some difficulties for them. And so they turn their attention away from Jerusalem for a period of time and begin to show more attention to Egypt, which gives the people what? A little more freedom, okay? They're a little more freedom now to move about and go from place to place. And that's kind of what you see happening here. God, through Jeremiah, tells them, though, don't be what? Don't be overconfident because they're coming back. Okay? Don't get convinced that of all the, because they're going to come back.
The reason for Egypt trying to enter into a war with Babylonians, I don't understand it. Was they requested by Jehoiakim to come to their aid?
Yeah, there have been allegiances made between Zedekiah and Egypt, or Jehoiakim and Egypt. Different kings have tried to appeal to other nations. The reason why, in a geographical sense, why Egypt would want to get involved is Judea is in prime location. It stands between them and all trade to the north. And so there's a geographical reason why they might be interested. And also they would be interested in beating down, if they can, Babylon up here in Judea rather than having to deal with them where? On their own doorstep, right? I'd much rather deal with them up there in Judea than have them down here besieging my cities and creating problems for me down here in Egypt. So there's a geographical reason, there's a military reason, there could be allegiance reasons why Egypt has decided to press the battle towards Babylon up here in Judea. But it can give a false sense that maybe God has turned from His judgment against Jerusalem. And so Jeremiah says that's not the case. In fact, he said that if every single man from Babylon was wounded, they'd still be strong enough to what? Rise up and burn the city down. Okay? Even Babylon at its weakest and wounded is going to be superior to anything that Jerusalem and Zedekiah and his men could mount in relationship to them.
I know you mentioned about this is not chronological order, but when Zedekiah sent his two officers to Jeremiah to pray for the Judea, was that before
Well, I mean, you're going, depending on which part of the siege you're talking. I don't know the answer to that. As far as was it prior to this slight reprieve or when they return? In those moments, it's kind of that. Those are the kinds of moments that are hard to fix. You can kind of get a point in time, depending on which king you're dealing with. You don't always get a sense of at what specific moment a particular event might be occurring, because he doesn't necessarily give us every detail necessary to know a particular moment, a year or something that would help us understand at what point in time those events. So I don't know whether we can know those. So where's Jeremiah go? Okay, he goes down to the land of Benjamin to receive what? His portion. Well, what's been going on in the place? Famine, pestilence, sword, okay? You've got this siege of Babylon. Basically, when you surround a land like this, nothing, what goes where?
In or out.
In or out, okay? So your supplies are low. And in the next chapter, it's even, you can't even find what?
Piece of bread.
Piece of bread, okay? And so there's this reprieve, and it seems as though there's low supplies. And so in order to receive supplies, you would go to some place where you're registered, and they would provide a portion to you. That's what I see here. That you go and where you've registered, and they will supply you with a portion. And he's hopeful that he will get his portion when he comes down in to Benjamin. And so that seems to be the indication of what's happening here, as that's how they're dealing with this momentary lapse of besiegement from Babylon, limited supplies. We're going to ration it out, and you've got to go to certain locations where you'd be registered as in some form, whether it's own land or whatever it might be, or your tribe, in order to receive the portion that belongs to you in the midst of the people.
Is this the land that he was deeded to?
Well, you've got that. You got that issue that we dealt with earlier about the land that he purchased, and those kinds of things that are happening in relationship to that. So
Mine says claim his property.
okay, and it could be that he's going to claim that which we talked about earlier that he was deeded to, and so there's. There could be all kinds of reasons why he's heading to there in order to receive that which is rightfully his. Whether it's this land that he purchased that we saw earlier in study, whether they're rationing portions of the supplies, the limited supplies that are available. This is where he has to go in order to receive it. The key to this is not necessarily why he's there, but what's the key to this text, though? That he's not what? He's not welcomed, okay? The key to that is he's not welcomed when he gets there, all right? The key to the story is he gets down there and he's not treated well by the people. When he was in the gate of Benjamin, verse 13, the captain of the ward was there, whose name was Arijah, the son of Shelemiah, the son of Hananiah, and he laid hold on Jeremiah the prophet, saying, "Thou art falling away to the Chaldeans." They lay hands on him because they think he's a what? He's a deserter or a traitor, okay? They think he's a traitor, okay? You've been telling us all this message about how we're going to fall and we're going to be destroyed, and eventually you hear that enough that you would just simply conclude that Jeremiah is for who? Rooting for the Babylonians, okay? Jeremiah's apparently rooting for the Babylonians because all he does is tell us how we're going to be destroyed and we're going to have famine and pestilence, and we might as well just give in to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. And so the mindset of the people is that he is a traitor. Now, here's what's interesting. The majority of the things Jeremiah has been doing occurred where? In Jerusalem. But apparently word has what? Word has spread about this prophet up in Jerusalem that is giving such a heavy burden and a heavy challenge in his prophecies concerning what's going to happen to the nation. So by the time that word gets to Benjamin, that land, and the people hear it, what's really what they hear? Jeremiah's a traitor, right? That's the way it sounds to them. By the time that message, not Jeremiah's trying to warn us, not Jeremiah's trying to give us the best approach here, where if we'll just give in to the Babylonians, we can be spared. That's not the message they're hearing. By the time it gets to the land of Benjamin, they just basically say, well, Jeremiah's a traitor. He sided up with the Babylonians. And so how do they react to that? Okay, they arrested. Jeremiah says there's no truth to that in verse 14. He says that's false. I haven't fallen in with the Chaldeans. I'm just telling and speaking the truths that come from God. But they not only arrest him, they're angry, verse 15, and what else? They strike him, okay? They smote him. They put him in prison in the house of Jonathan the scribe, for they had made that the prison. And he stays there for a period of time in verse 16. Who comes on the scene? Zedekiah does. So in verse 17, Zedekiah shows up, and he wants to see him. The king asked him secretly in his house and said, is there any word from Jehovah? And Jeremiah said, there is. He said, also thou shalt be delivered into the hand of the king of Babylon. If you read chapter 38, we know that this isn't the only time that Zedekiah wants a private word with Jeremiah. What's that tell you about Zedekiah and what he's hearing from Jeremiah? If he keeps wanting these private conversations with him. Yeah, I think he partially at least believes it. I think Zedekiah is aware that his resistance to Jeremiah's message, and because, remember, Zedekiah is the last of the kings before the complete fall and destruction. So he has been able to witness the things that Jeremiah has said and that have happened up until now. And he's been able to discern which prophets were speaking the truth and which ones weren't. And so he wants private conversations. But why not public conversations? Why not just come out in support of Jeremiah? Yeah, his own leadership, okay? His own cabinet, if you will, the princes that he surrounded himself would have none of that. Okay? So for fear of reprisal, he always wants to have these private conversations. You'll have another one with him in Jeremiah chapter 38. You'll see another similar kind of conversation. But what's Zedekiah want to know?
He wants to know if it's changed.
Yeah, anything different. We see the Babylonians maybe taking a rest here. He said, could there be anything different? And what's Jeremiah say? Verse 17 says, it's still the same. You're going to end up in the hands of the king of Babylon. In fact, he said, moreover, Jeremiah says, verse 18, unto King Zedekiah, wherein have I sinned against thee, or against thy servants, or against this people, that ye have put me in prison? So what's Jeremiah say about this prison that he's in? Yeah, I'm there unfairly. What have I done? I haven't done anything to anybody. I didn't do anything wrong. I haven't sinned against anybody. All I've done is spoke the truth that has been revealed from God's Word, and this is what I get. I get thrown into prison and challenged. Where now are your prophets that prophesied unto you, saying, the king of Babylon shall not come against you, nor against this land? Anyone who ever says there's no sarcasm in the Bible has missed a lot of verses, because that's complete sarcasm, right? Jeremiah says, you want to throw me in prison saying that I'm the false prophet, I'm the liar, I'm the one causing the problems. Well, what about all those prophets you've been listening to? How's that been working out for you? How are those prophecies turning out? And so with a sarcastic kind of tone, Jeremiah tells the king, listen, you've been listening to the wrong guys all this time. You paid attention to prophets that have been telling you nonsense. I've been telling you the truth, and you know it. Or else you wouldn't be having this private conversation with me. You wouldn't have called for me to come out of that prison and sit down and have this chat with you if you didn't know the truth. And the truth is, your prophets have failed, and I've been speaking the truth. Why are you punishing me?
Zedekiah, is he looking for an easy way out?
Yeah.
Trying to blame somebody else?
Yeah.
He's kind of between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of interesting. Verse 2, he wouldn't listen to it now. He said, please listen to what I have to say to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So he asks, verse 20, now hear, I pray thee, O Lord, my Lord the King, that my supplication, I pray thee, be presented before thee, that thou cause me not to return to the house of Jonathan the scribe, lest I die there. Then Zedekiah the king commanded, and they committed Jeremiah into the court of the guard. And they gave him daily a loaf of bread out of the baker's street until all the bread in the city was spent. Thus Jeremiah remained in the court of the guard. And so again, if Zedekiah thinks Jeremiah is just completely off his rocker, and that he is a genuine traitor and is is guilty of treason, do you think he removes him out of Jonathan's prison and starts feeding him and taking care of him in the midst of the thing? I mean, you keep in mind, in the midst of the problem where supplies are low and the ability to have provisions are low, Zedekiah realizes there's some legitimacy about Jeremiah. And so he entreats him not exactly as he should, but at least with some favor in this text.
And my verse says, please let my petition be accepted before you.
Yeah. Please hear. But I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back there. Any other thoughts about chapter 37?
Well, I think the reason he wasn't being, like you said, the supplies are low, and he wasn't being fed when he was in prison.
Yeah, it wasn't
If he
good.
could die, he wasn't going to get anything to eat.
Yeah. There were going to be drastic difficulties for Jeremiah if he continued, and we're going to see that even more here in the way they deal with Jeremiah. Let's jump to chapter 38, because I think we can kind of tie the thoughts together between the two chapters and the things that are going on here. So here's a group of men who hear Jeremiah's message. And in verse 2 he says, Thus saith Jehovah, he that abideth in this city shall die by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence. But he that goeth forth to the Chaldeans shall live, and his life shall be unto him for a prey, and he shall live. Thus saith Jehovah, this city shall surely be given into the hand of the army of the king of Babylon, and he shall take it. Same message that he's been preaching, okay? And they are not kindly to it. They are not taking well to the notion that our only hope and our only ability for any kind of benefit is to turn ourselves over to Babylon. That isn't settling well. And so, but you can't change it. That's the only message there is. Resist and die. Give in and be spared and live in captivity are really the only choices that they are given. So the princes come to the king, verse 4, and say, Let this man, we pray thee, be put to death. For as much as he weakeneth the hands of the men of war that remain in this city, and the hands of all the people, in speaking such words unto them. For this man seeketh not the welfare of this people, but the hurt. And so when you hear this message that Babylon's going to win, there's no victory here for us, their argument is that Jeremiah has hurt the morale of whom? Of soldiers in the military, the people that are fighting, and the people themselves that are going to have to fight in this. Now from a pure military or human standpoint, is that true? Yeah, it's absolutely true, okay? You keep getting told by a fella, and his prophecies seem to be the only ones that are coming true, and the only prophet that seems to be having any legitimacy about the things that he's talking about is Jeremiah, and he keeps telling you that we're going to fall and this city's going to be destroyed. I think if I heard that over and over and over again, I begin to wonder, what am I fighting for here? What's the reason for me to continue to fight this battle? And so in a weird kind of sense, they're right. He has hurt the morale of the populace. His words have diminished their willingness to fight. But that's a good thing in the sense that that's what God wants. That's what God doesn't want you to fight. God wants you to submit. They hadn't been submitting to whom? God. Think about the imagery of that. They had not been submitting to God. And so what God says is, you've turned your back against me, but in order to teach you or educate you in this, to teach you the lesson, your only way of survival is to submit to whom? To me, which means submitting to Nebuchadnezzar, right? Give in to the Babylonians. Submission was a hard thing for them, and it was the only means by which to survive. They hadn't desired to submit to God. They hadn't liked the idea of submission to anyone or anything. And now submission is the only means of survival that they're being offered. So the king, his princes come, so we need to kill this guy. We need to put him to death. This isn't working. He's killing the morale. He's damaging our cause. And so what's the king say? Sounds a little like who in New Testament? Sounds a little like Pilate. I don't want anything to do with this. Whatever you guys want to do. Whatever you guys want to do. Zedekiah the king said, behold, he is in your hand, for the king is not he that can do anything against you. In other words, Zedekiah is you talk about beating down morale. What's Zedekiah just say? I don't have any what? I don't have any power anyway. I don't have any power anyway. You guys you're going to do, that's what it says, for the king is not he that can do anything against you. In other words, I could stop you if I wanted to. You guys have rendered me powerless as well. I don't have any authority over you. If you guys decide you want to put him to death, you're going to do it, despite what I say. And so it's really an interesting kind of dynamic. When you add what we read a little bit about in verse chapter 37, you see a little bit of what's going on here in chapter 38. There's this odd kind of sense that the only friend, if you will, that Zedekiah has is who?
Jeremiah.
Is Jeremiah. That's kind of an odd little thing that's happening here, but that's kind of the picture you get, is that Zedekiah needs somebody to talk to from now and then, and who's he called for? He called for Jeremiah. Okay, because he doesn't trust the guys that are surrounding him. He doesn't trust those guys. And he realizes he's powerless against them. So they take Jeremiah, verse 6, and they cast him into the dungeon of Melchijah, the king's son, that was in the court of the guard, and they let down Jeremiah with cords, and in the dungeon there was no water but mire, and Jeremiah sank in the mire. There were lots of cisterns, apparently, as I understand it, in Jerusalem. They actually had, as I've read, some very sophisticated means by which to keep the people with water in that region. So these, but once the water has been used up, you get kind of a miry, muddy mess at the bottom of this cistern. So that's what they're using as this dungeon. So much so that they have to lower him down in there, and he's basically in there. There's no water but mire, and he's sunk down in it. This is not good. They've done this. They don't intend to, in a sense, to take a sword to him. They intend to what? Starve him. We're going to put you. Not only are you going to die, you're going to die miserable. They're very cold to think about how they're treating this prophet. But their intent is to have him die slowly in this mire, in this dungeon. But a eunuch in the king's house, in verse 7, heard what they had done to Jeremiah, and the king's still sitting in the gate of Benjamin. And this Abimelech goes to the king's house, and he tells the king, he says, verse 9, my lord the king, these men have done evil in all that they have done to Jeremiah the prophet. And they have cast him into the dungeon, and he is like to die in the place where he is, because of the famine, for there is no more bread in the city. So the king commanded Obed-Melech, the Ethiopian, saying, take from hence 30 men with thee, and take up Jeremiah the prophet out of the dungeon before he die. And so this eunuch, this servant of the king, calls for attention to the king to be noted on what's happening with Jeremiah. And he basically tells the king, this isn't right. They put him down in this dungeon. There's no supplies in the city. There is no way he's going to survive. In fact, he's nigh unto what? He's nigh unto death already. Okay? And so the king sends whom? Sends 30, according to the translations, he sends 30 men. Some folks you read from wonder whether there was a misunderstanding of the numbering system, and because 30 seems like what? Seems like a lot. But if they're going to resist the idea that Jeremiah should be taken out of this dungeon, you may need 30 men in order to accomplish this. So whatever. They send some men. They send enough men to take care of this. And they head out, verse 11, and go into the house of the king unto the treasury, and took thence rags and worn out garments, and let them down by cords into the dungeon to Jeremiah. If Jeremiah has been let down into a dungeon of mire, they had to lower him down in there. Is there any ability for him to escape?
No.
No, except with
Help.
help. So do you need to guard this pit? No, okay? You don't need to guard it because he's not getting out. And the last thing you would think on people's minds would be to let the treasonous Jeremiah the prophet, who's in their minds caused all this problem for themselves, out of there. So they're able to go. They get some old rags, some old garments, tie them together. You almost, to me, it's kind of interesting because every time you ever see somebody try to break out of prison, what do you see get thrown out the window? Bed sheets, right? They're all tied together. Guess what? Guess how they got Jeremiah out of it? They took old garments, tied them together, and made a makeshift rope, and pulled Jeremiah up out of this dungeon, out of this pit. And the Ethiopian says to Jeremiah, verse 12, "Put now these rags and worn out garments under thine armholes, under the cords." So Jeremiah is not strong enough to what? Right. He's not, this is, he's such a weak estate, there's no way for him to go hand over hand and climb up out of here. He tells him, you wrap it under you and we're going to what? We're going to pull you up, which may also require the extra bodies in order to do that. So they draw him up, verse 16. Jeremiah with the cords, and took him up out of the dungeon, and Jeremiah remained in the court of the guard. So, out of the miry pit, still in the court of the guard at this point. So Zedekiah sends for him. He takes Jeremiah the prophet unto him into the third entry that is in the house of Jehovah. And the king said unto Jeremiah, I will ask thee a thing, hide nothing from me. Now, before you ask it, nobody really knows what this third entry is. Okay, lots of guys speculate, but nobody really knows for sure what this third entry is. Most conclude that it is some kind of passageway between the palace and the temple. Okay, there's a connection somehow between. So it's an entryway that allows for the king to be able to travel back and forth without having to use the main entrances that are used. Keep in mind they think in terms of, I think it's east, south, north, and west. So 1 would be east, 2 would be south, 3 would be north, 4 would be west gate. And so some say that maybe it's just the north gate because they would enumerate things in that fashion. But at any rate, it's a manner by which Zedekiah and Jeremiah can come in contact with each other without what? Without anybody else really knowing. Okay? It's not a public entrance. It's not a main entrance. It's got enough privacy that they can have this moment where they can discuss some things privately. So Zedekiah asked Jeremiah, and he says, hide nothing from me. What's Jeremiah say? You'll sure enough kill me. If I tell you the truth about what's happening, you'll put me to death. Yeah. And so you're gonna be so angry with what I'm about to say, you're going to want to put me to death. If I give you counsel, if I try to just instruct you, why now? Why would all of a sudden would I have any thought to the idea that you're going to listen after all this time? You'll not hearken to what I'm going to say. But what's Zedekiah telling him in verse 16?
I'm not going to kill you.
Okay. I make an oath, okay? I make an oath to you privately, but I make an oath to you that I will not put you to death, neither will I give thee into the hand of these men that seek thy life. So he gives him some assurance. Then he says, thus saith Jehovah, verse 17. God of hosts, the God of Israel, if thou wilt go forth unto the king of Babylon's princes, then thy soul shall live, and this city shall not be burned with fire. Thou shalt live in thy house. What's the message?
Surrender.
Surrender. And that message has been what? That's been the same message the entire time. God's bringing this judgment whether you like it or not. God's bringing this judgment whether you think you can resist it or not. God is dealing with you whether you want Him to or not. Nothing's changing. Your only option is to give over to the Babylonians. Your only option, and the only option that people have ever had, was to surrender, accept the captivity, survive, and return to build anew again. That's been the offer all along, and it still hasn't changed. And here's what's interesting. Throw this extra thought. The king has an option here that will allow him to not only spare his own life, but spare whom or what? Spare the city. This city shall not be burned with fire, and thou shalt live, and thy house. He's been given an opportunity to spare everyone the misery that is coming. And so he has to either let go of his pride and surrender, or listen to Jeremiah, who, again, Zedekiah believes Jeremiah. I can't see it any other way. You don't keep having these conversations. If you think Jeremiah is ridiculous and is so far out of touch with reality, you don't care whether he's stuck in that miry dungeon. You don't call for him to come and have this conversation. You don't offer your oath to him that I'll take care of you. Zedekiah believes what Jeremiah is saying. He just doesn't have the courage to act on it. He just doesn't have the courage to do anything about it. In fact, he's afraid of whom more? Verse 19. I'm afraid of the Jews that are fallen away to the Chaldeans, lest they deliver me into their hand and they mock. If I give in now, it's like somebody that's picked a fight, and they're to the point they know they've lost, and they know there's no victory to be had, but they're afraid that if I give in now, what's going to happen? People are going to what? They're going to laugh, mock, scoff. They're going to make fun of me. Okay? I'm a failure. I lost the kingdom. I'm going to be mocked and scoffed by everybody who listened to you and gave themselves over to the Chaldeans. I'm going to be a laughingstock. But he says they'll not deliver you. Obey, I beseech thee, the voice of Jehovah in that which I speak unto thee, so it shall be well with thee, and thy soul shall live. You just need to do what God's asked you to do, Zedekiah. And quit worrying about whether somebody's going to mock or scoff at you or what's going to be the result. I'm telling you the result. You will live. The city won't be burned. People will survive. But if you refuse, this is the word that Jehovah hath showed me. Behold, all the women that are left in the king of Judah's house shall be brought forth to the king of Babylon's princes. And those women shall say, thy familiar friends have set thee on and have prevailed over thee. Now that thy feet are sunk in the mire, they are turned away back. They shall bring out all thy wives and thy children to the Chaldeans, and thou shalt not escape out of their hand, but shall be taken by the hand of the king of Babylon, and shalt cause this city to be burned with fire. So he says, you want to talk about being mocked? You stay here and let this place be destroyed because of your stubbornness. He said, for lack of a better description, the harem that prior kings have left, those women will come out and mock you, verse 22. And then notice verse 23, I think a completely different group of women. Because first, verse 22, it's the women of the king's house, the concubines and the harem that would have been around. Verse 23, it's the wives and children that he has personally. They're going to meet with the challenges and difficulties that you have. The only embarrassment here, Zedekiah, is going to be you not listening to what God has asked you to do. So you've got a choice. Keep resisting, and the city's going down, your family's going down, everything's going to be destroyed. Give in, and you'll spare the people, and your family included. So what's Zedekiah saying in verse 24?
anybody else.
Don't tell anybody else. Don't let anybody else know what you just said. Don't, because if the princes hear it, and hear that I've talked to you in verse 25, they come to me and say unto thee, declare unto us now what thou hast said unto the king, hide it not from us, and we will not put thee to death. Also what the king said unto thee. Zedekiah is afraid when the princes find out, and they're going to find out, okay? How are they going to find out? They're going to find a what? They're going to find an empty dungeon, right? They're going to find an empty dungeon. And so they're going to know that the only person really able to make that happen was the king. So they're going to come to you, Jeremiah, and they're going to want to know what this conversation was like. What did you say? What did the king say? And you tell them I just presented my supplication before the king that he would not cause me to return to Jonathan's house to die there. Is that true, by the way? Yeah, okay. Jeremiah is not lying. He's just not telling what? The whole story. Okay. And I don't know that he's obligated to tell these murderous princes who simply want to stop anything that God has intended in his process. I don't think he has any obligation to tell them everything that was converted. And they seem to be satisfied with that answer, right? He says to them when they come, he says, I was just asking that I not be back in that dungeon, in that pit. And that seems reasonable to them. And they seem to accept
There
that.
was no way they could disprove it, so they had to
Right,
quit.
right.
They weren't privy to the conversation.
Yeah. And so, verse 28 kind of gives us an indication of Jeremiah's last days prior to the complete destruction. He says, so Jeremiah abode in the court of the guard until the day that Jerusalem was taken. So, not back to the pit, not back in the mire, given the ability to live at least in the court of the guard, rather than down in that dungeon, in that miry cistern that was there. Any thoughts, questions about that chapter? Really, only kind of one thing happening in that chapter. This conversation.
Yeah, I've wondered about Zedekiah. He was appointed by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Judah, in place of Jehoiakim. Of course, the Lord prophesied that none of Jehoiakim's heirs, children, would sit on the throne of David.
Right.
But if Nebuchadnezzar appointed Zedekiah king, why didn't he tell Zedekiah his plan? You'll live if you surrender. If you try to fight, you'll die.
Well,
Unless he didn't have any direct contact with them. In other words, maybe the appointment as king was indirect through other men too.
well, I'm sure that he understood certain factors about, because he's here, but it's power. Once you get into the position of power, you want more. And why should I continue to stay under Nebuchadnezzar's thumb? I'll rule this land. And I think that's kind of where Zedekiah ends up. Real quick, the princes want to have Jeremiah killed. Let's use the questions as review. What were the words of Jeremiah that angered the princes?
The city could be given to
Okay.
the hands of
Yeah, the city's going to fall. Okay? The city's going to fall. What request did they make to the king in verse 4?
Kill Jeremiah.
All right. They want to put Jeremiah to death. Okay? They wanted to put him to death. Where did they place him? Yeah, I don't even know how to spell that, but we're going to try. Okay? Down in the mire of that place. With no water, no sustenance. Who rescued him? Okay, but ultimately it was who?
The king and Zedekiah.
Yeah, Zedekiah. Okay, and sent Abimelech, the eunuch comes and tells him, but Zedekiah is the one who actually sends and gets Jeremiah out of this circumstance. Okay, was Jeremiah reluctant to speak to the king? Yeah, he said, I'm afraid you'll kill me if I tell you the truth. I tell you the truth, you'll kill me. He had to have a conversation before he'd have a conversation. What could the king do to spare the city of Jerusalem? Surrender. Okay? He could surrender. Why was the king hesitant to do this? Because of whom? Yeah. Fear of the Jews that had left and had given over to the Chaldeans. He was afraid to be mocked by him. But basically, he was given two options to the king and his house. If he gives over to Nebuchadnezzar, they'll be what?
Saved.
They'll be saved, resist, and they'll be punished. Okay, so that was the basic thought of chapter 38. Chapters 39 and 40, then, Lord willing, on Wednesday night at what time?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.